Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depends on what part of the world you happen to be. For us, for me, my name is Ricardo Carioni. I am Deputy Head of the Embassy of Nicaragua here in London. And it is a profound pleasure and honor to welcome Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to today's event, El Güegüense, Intangible Heritage of Humanity. We wish to warmly welcome you what will be and what we hope you will enjoy a celebration of the quintessential living expression of Nicaraguan culture and one of the oldest indigenous theatrical plays in the world. This is our second event of this year's 2021 Celebratory Series, Nicaragua 200 Years of Independence. It's a very special year for all of us Nicaraguans, or all of us and those of you who also love and know and are interested in the country. It's our 200th year of independence from Spain. So throughout the year as an embassy, we're showcasing different elements of our culture. And today's is a very special one. Today's event, we try to do and convey one of the jewels of our culture and the world culture through a virtual fireside chat with Professor Paul Edward Montgomery, with the Ambassador of Nicaragua to the UK, to Ireland, and to Iceland, Her Excellency Guisell Morales, with Nicolas Melillo, Foundation Cigars owner and master blender, and with a fellow Nicaraguan Art Director of Foundation Cigars, Alex García, to learn about and to celebrate this magical and colorful representation of Nicaraguan folklore, a satirical play written by an anonymous author in the 16th century. The event will follow a webinar style, so there will be a series of interventions as we go along, followed by a dialogue amongst the speakers and a Q&A. So as we go along through the event, which should last about an hour or so, we really would love to see your questions and your engagement. But please don't hesitate to drop your questions in the chat, and I will try to pick those up in the role of a moderator, which I'll attempt to play today and do my best in doing so. So bear with me with that. And we'll make sure to try to address those questions at the Q&A in the second phase of the event. Today's event, I know we have a good number of attendees here in the webinar on Zoom, but it's also being live streamed on the Embassy of Nicaragua's YouTube channel. Ultimately, what we wish to accomplish is that you take away from this event some level of knowledge, some level of understanding, some level of appreciation of this wonderful treasure that really identifies us as Nicaraguans, and be able to share it from different perspectives. But before I continue rambling on, allow me to first introduce, for the welcome words of today's event, the Ambassador of Nicaragua, Her Excellency Guisell Morales-Echaverry, Diriambina, and we'll tell you what Diriambino means later on throughout the event. So, Ambassador, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. And please welcome everyone, and thank you for being here tonight with us in this, as Ricardo mentioned, the second event, a series of celebratory events of the Nicaraguan and Central America 200 years of independence. That will be in 15th of September this year. So tonight we wish to introduce, to learn, and to celebrate Güegüense, this Nicaraguan masterpiece of Nicaraguan culture, considered the oldest indigenous theatrical play of the post-colonial American continent. It's being born in Diriamba and grew up in Diriamba, so I just close my eyes and I can see it, the play coming live in my head, interpreted in the street processions in honor of San Sebastian, patron saint of Diriamba, with all the music of the violins, the guitars, and the drums that make the accompaniment of the play. But also the beautiful costumes, the wooden mask, the carved by artisans of Diriamba, the hats, colorful, and every character has its own. It's different. It's a different. So I remember el alguacil with all these lots of coins in the costume, and the most iconic, what we call it, the macho raton, that also is the one who also do the dances, and it includes women too. So we are still there, although it's a very, because it reflects the time. It is not a preponderant position of the woman there, but what is important today is that the Güegüense remains a vivid and forceful expression of protest against the colonial rule, a symbol of survival and resistance that is performed in the street art today, and that has been orally transmitted from generation to generation until 1942, when was published for the first time, and a year later was also recorded the music for the first time. The Güegüense is a symbol of our identity, and I want to stress that although now it's played everywhere in Nicaragua, it's Diriamba what has preserved or protected the way it used to be performed before in the streets by just regular people who practice the whole year. And this is my hometown offers the unique chance to observe the El Güegüense performed by descendants of its creator, the inhabitants of Nicaragua. So today we will hear more from Güegüense and what it means in the identity and the history, and from every perspective, and from Professor Paul Edward Montgomery, a good friend of mine, Nicolas Melillo, a master cigar maker, owner of Foundation Cigar of Estelí, who fall in love with Nicaragua and El Güegüense too. And also the artists behind Foundation's collectible cigar boxes and bands, that one of them is our El Güegüense, or the wise man, Alex García. And all of this is that to celebrate Nicaraguan people, land, and culture. So Ricardo has introduced them more properly, but the most important at this moment is to welcome you, and please enjoy. Over to you, Ricardo.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those words, and very personal topic, as we know, and as we are learning now, and how it is it's almost in the subconscious collective of both Nicaraguans, but particularly those of that area of Diriamba and Carazo who grew up with this. I'll just say a couple of words about the play in itself, and essentially it's a synthesis. For those of you who are a little bit less familiar with it, it's a synthesis of Spanish and indigenous culture, combining theater, dance, and music. As we mentioned, it's considered one of the world's most distinctive colonial-era expressions, and it was inscribed in 2008 on the list of Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity by UNESCO, having been originally proclaimed in 2005. The earliest texts were probably composed around the early 18th century. Paul may have different research or not on that, but the story revolves around encounters between Spanish colonial authorities and Native Americans, represented particularly by a central character, a very powerful elder figure in the pre-Hispanic, pre-Columbian Nicaragua, El Güegüense. Counter with charges leveled against him by the colonial officials, the story goes, then him, through a series of clever verbal maneuvers, rather than directly confronting or challenging the Spanish colonial fist, which will be probably not of his favor, probably end up dead, like many vast majority of indigenous who did so ended. He attempts to appear consistently cooperative and compliant, whilst utilizing a subterfuge to undermine the colonization and the empire building efforts of Spain in Nicaragua at that time. El Güegüense is a forceful expression of protest against colonial rule, as the ambassador said. Just recapping, it is performed in the city of Diriamba, usually around the month of January or so. And it coincides with the celebrations for the patron of the city, Saint Sebastian. It is sort of a series of street processions performed by 8 major characters with costumes, wooden masks, hats, and peacock feathers. It's quite a magical expression. And today, as ambassador said, it remains a symbol of survival. To get you a little bit of what it looks like for those of you who haven't had the pleasure to see it, let me just play a few seconds of a video, very, very short. And hopefully that sets the tone before we can introduce Paul. He allows me to call him Paul. I should call him Dr. Montgomery Ramírez, but we'll do it in a Nicaraguan way today and call each other by first names. So bear with me while I share my screen and get our first video. And bear with me, just pause this. Here we go. Kind of still learning the trade of moderator on Zoom. Takes a bit of skill that I'm still sort of mastering. But with that, I want to welcome Professor, good friend Paul. He's a decolonial heritage specialist and public archaeologist. He's a member of the Indigenous Council of the World Archaeological Congress and Indigenous Heritage. He is from the Manqueme people of Nicaragua in his roots, and this has inspired many of his specialties. Paul works on issues of presenting, representing, and decolonizing heritage narratives in media, tourism, museums, and education. Paul is also focused on delivering decolonial options to heritage practice in the shape of sustainable futures in tourism, food sovereignty, and indigenous rights. Paul is a consultant, lecturer, and he's the founder of a very interesting, a very special small organization, which hopefully we'll get a chance to learn more as we go along today, for cultural heritage and indigenous rights called Hilo Azul, the Blue Thread. Paul holds a PhD from the Department of Archaeology of the University of York, and it was precisely during his time at York University, about 4 years or so, that I personally was fortunate enough to meet him. And since the very beginning, he had such an impact on me personally. I studied cultural anthropology when I was young, so I could really fall in love just listening to Paul for hours and hours in his lectures. So without further ado, I leave you, Paul, with the virtual floor and look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much for introducing me, the kind introduction. So I'm Dr. Paul Edward Montgomery Ramírez, and let's just get right into this with this sharing screen business. So I'm going to be talking to you about a couple of things, but this is all framed within the symbol of El Güegüense as a figure of resistance. So currently I'm at Cleveland State University in my academic life, where I'm an adjunct professor, and I also work as the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act compliance officer for the area. And with this new organization that's still very, very new organization, the Blue Thread Hilo Azul, I'm what I like to call a heritage weaver. I don't like any of those fancy terms or anything like that. So heritage weaver, I kind of enjoy the sound of it. And if any of you like my ramblings, you are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter, or I have email addresses at the end of my talk that you can follow me through and engage with me on. So let me just start out a little bit by talking about some of the things that I work on as this organization, the Blue Thread. So what I'm very focused on with heritage, with how we work with the world, is looking into options that we have for our present and for our future. And in particular, I'm looking at traditional answers that we can find to the challenges of today and tomorrow. And we see this happening a lot, but for instance, the wildfires that have been going on in the western half of the United States and in Canada, and that went all throughout Australia, are largely to do with a ceasing to use traditional methods of land management. Indigenous people had managed their landscapes for thousands, tens of thousands of years in very healthy ways. And within about 2 centuries, how modern usage of land has taken it, we're now seeing very unsustainable climates, with soil erosion, with salination, with forest fires, with a lot of challenges that in the face of climate change are just going to get much, much worse. So one of the sides of the work that I do is looking into these options that can meet these challenges. So finding ways of tapping back into traditional land management for more sustainable forms of agriculture, which then can work into revitalizing foodways, more diverse crops, more diverse sources of food, which they themselves can be used to engage into a new market. They can also be used to move away from unhealthy agricultural practices, monocropping, that if a disease or a blight comes through, then unfortunately that monocrop is gone. So through diversity, we can maintain soil integrity. We can combat erosion. We can then combat flooding. And also by engaging in different forms of food, we can also look out for the health of our communities. So it's not just, purely kind of cultural, cerebral things that I look at. I look at very realistic options for our future and, for our present. But we can't tap into these options if we still think about the world in the same way that we've been taught to. If we think about the, if we just go along with the stories that we are brought up with about the past and people of the past. So in order to provide a good foundation to work with these decolonial options through, we have to start looking at how to reevaluate our heritages. And so one of the main things that I also do in my work is to find these marginalized heritages and look at options of how we can re-narrate, how we can talk about these in different ways. So that way we can bring pride to modern Indigenous people, who are at the most at risk groups of people in any country that they exist in. just across the board. So helping give access to, well-being, mental health for these communities that are incredibly marginalized. And we can reshape landscapes through this different engagement in heritage at different levels to retell stories, and then to move forward towards these options for sustainable and resilient futures, again, through agriculture, through sustainable building methods and materials, and through sustainable land management. So all these are very much the things that I work on, and they are very interwoven in the end. And one of these ways that this gets interwoven is El Güegüense itself. There is an actual segue into this. El Güegüense means an incredible amount of things to an incredible amount of people throughout time, and it has been changing. As was said, this performance is incredibly old, and what I'm going to actually talk about is that this performance is actually much, much older than we officially talk about it being. While we typically talk about it as, the play as we know it now, yes, is very much from the colonial period. We see our earliest mentions of it, depending on what we want to see as being a mention to it, but we can see this play in the form that we might understand back in the 1500s and in the 1600s. And we definitely hear of this play exactly as we know it at different periods of time, played not just in Diriamba, but also where my family's from as well. So in Masaya, in Monimbo, which is to this day an indigenous community. And so there, these little pockets of it's the same part of Nicaragua that have held on to this tradition. I think Diriamba does it a little bit better than Monimbo anymore these days, as there are other performances in Monimbo that have kind of taken a little bit more precedence. But there's still a great love for El Güegüense in Monimbo. Now, how this play, how this performance is talked about and considered realistically depends on who is actually considering the play. For an incredible amount of time, this play has been talked about as a part of the triumph of the creation of the Latin people, which there is in this this concept of the creation of the Latino or the mestizo. There is a very troubling history through all of that. That's a reality of the system of colonization that happened, and in some ways still does continue to happen. Regardless of any way you look at it, if two different groups of people are in close quarters for long enough, yeah, they're going to start adopting some of the same mannerisms, some of the same styles. But with the systems that we see in Central America, in particular, in the formation of the state, the national identity of Nicaragua, there was a big move to get away from, we're not exactly Spanish, now are we? We're not exactly European. We have other facets about us that are incredibly important. And in this pursuit, a lot of thinkers at the time, people who were the movers and shakers in society, they tapped into these indigenous pasts, but in many respects, they did this at the expense of indigenous people in their present. In the effort of talking about an indigenous past, there was a frequency to make it as though indigenous people just stopped existing. And there's a lot that can be said to that, but that's very much another talk. And we see that this characteristic of the triumph of the mixing has trickled into El Güegüense, into considerations of El Güegüense, where we had very famous thinkers who considered this the marriage between the Spanish governor, who's his name's Tatuanes, which is not actually even a Spanish name. It's a Nahuatl word for the Lord. So the Lord, the Spanish Lord, is actually an indigenous word in this. And the same goes with the name of his daughter, Suche Malinche, which the first Suche is a flower in indigenous language, and Malinche translates to, or can translate to, the revered prisoner. So this again is from the Nahuatl language. So as Ricardo was saying, a lot of this play revolves around trickery, an incredible amount of trickery. And it's the language that is used in this performance that is this, this trickery that Güegüense himself, he either pretends that he can't hear what is being said, or that the people who have written the play as we understand it now, because it was performed purely orally for centuries. And in point of fact, most people who still perform El Güegüense today don't actually read scripts. They just learn it orally. But an incredible amount of the language in the play isn't Spanish. There are words from both Nahuatl language and from my people's language, Mange language, that show up in the play to make either double entendres, to kind of mock the Spanish right in front of their faces. So much so this play was so controversial in the late colonial period that it was actively outlawed. It was actively outlawed in the second quarter of the 1800s. But the old folk who were doing this, they said, well, I would rather do this and go to jail. And yeah, you had a lot of people going to jail over doing this tradition of resistance. And so it comes down to, who are we looking at as who is being resisted again, being resisted. And so Dable Bolaños very famously attached the resistance of El Güegüense to anti-imperialism, against American imperialism. And that's one of the strong draws to El Güegüense, is this figure is a figure of resistance against everybody, any force that could possibly be oppressive. El Güegüense, which that name itself is also a Nahuatl word, which means the wise one or the wise man. And this figure, he shows up across indigenous traditions in different forms. In Native North America, we would very often call this person Raven or Coyote or the Trickster. This person shows up in so much indigenous festival and play. He shows up in very similar ways, with the same kind of humor, mocking humor, and also highly earthy humor as well. So that's a very important factor about this person. So I'm not, while I trace El Güegüense in this story back much further than as we know El Güegüense today, he's still an incredibly important figure for Nicaraguans all around because of the fact that he is the symbol of resisting unrighteous authority. Now, I do want to take the last little bit of time that I have with this and talk about evidence that we have of how this story is actually traced to something other than just the one play. So it is actually very likely that the portions of El Güegüense can be divided into two very different things. That the storyline of tricking the Spanish authorities is a bit newer addition. Obviously, it could only be added once the Spanish arrived. However, there are parts in this performance, that go back to well-established pre-Hispanic traditions. So there's a famous line near the end of El Güegüense when he talks about this time of the blue thread. He talks about it specifically to his children as a time before the Spanish arrived. And so there are lots of thoughts of what this could be in reference to, but there's one very striking element. And so pre-Hispanic Nicaragua was actually very well known for its cotton textiles, which were outlawed by the Somoza dynasty in the early 1900s. But we also know of a color, of a special ritual color that we see all around Mesoamerica. And it's called Maya blue, who it's most associated with. And it's associated with sacrifice and ritual existence. It was such an important color that it survived colonization well into the 1800s. It shows up in churches in Latin America that were built in the 1800s. And we don't have any evidence for this color in Nicaragua, but as an archaeologist, that's not too troubling because, well, fabrics don't survive in that weather anyhow. So I would be very surprised to find any. But there are references and there's an established understanding of at least what this color might represent. So there's that line in itself. Now, the other part that is actually kind of the most focused is the machos, those donkeys that were doing that dance, dancing around, kicking into the air, and all of that good stuff. Now, we see figures like this showing up elsewhere across Latin America, or rather in Mesoamerica, I should say. So from Western Mexico in through Guatemala, Belize, and down into Costa Rica as well. And we see this in several fashions. So these are pictures from two different performances in two very different countries. On the left, we've got in Monimbo, we've got some machos dancing, but on the right-hand side, that's a deer dance from Guatemala, which deer dance shows up all over Mesoamerica. And it tends to have some kind of similar features about it. It is about a story about sacrifice to keep order in the world. And the sacrificial entity in this is the deer. The deers, they, by their sacrifice, it continues to bring life and light to the universe. And it's usually a willing sacrifice, but there's a little bit of trickery that also tends to be involved in that. And lo and behold, Güegüense shows up in a little bit of a different name. They usually call him the Old Man, but he shows up in deer dances in all across Guatemala, in Belize, and in Mexico as well. So I don't think I have time to show that, and this was being a grumpy video earlier, but you can find depictions of deer dances online as you wish, and you will note that there are similarities in costuming and in style between these dances and the dances that we see of the machos, there are dances throughout El Güegüense, but once we start seeing the machos show up, those dances become incredibly different and animalistic to represent animals, which you can see among deer dances from the Mayo people in Mexico, or the Yaqui people. Look at some of their deer dances. They are gorgeous and interpretive of portraying an animal, portraying a deer. So of course, I get it that a deer is not a horse or a donkey. Yeah, I totally respect that. However, the very first references that Mesoamericans had when they encountered horses, I'm going to read one of their earliest records of this. So the stags came forward carrying soldiers on their backs. The stags, called horses, snort and bellow. They make a loud noise when they run. They make a great din as if stones were raining upon the earth. So the very first reference that Mesoamericans had to a horse was to call it a deer. And we see that over and over and over again, is that horses are called deer. Sometimes in some native languages, we see that a deer ends up being the word for a horse. A field deer is a horse, or a mountain deer is a deer. So what we see is a trend in turning a deer rather into a horse for a few reasons. One of the reasons, and an interesting fact, is it was actually illegal in Central America for indigenous people to ride horses. And yet the last action that Güegüense and his children do is get up onto the backs of the machos and ride them off into the sunset. So that in itself is a absolute power play by El Güegüense, showing off that he can do this. And in addition, we see other performances that have their roots in indigenous culture, where it's very clearly a deer. And these are elements from the same indigenous people, the same Manqueme people, Chorotega people, who are the ones who created El Güegüense. They do it at several points in time. This is a Baile de Dieguita, which this one's a performance of it in Costa Rica in Guanacaste. And that is a deer that when we see this performance show up in Nicaragua, it's pretty much the same performance, but again, it's a horse. So it's politically easier for indigenous people to, with the importance, the significance of what a deer was, that was abundantly clear to priests, abundantly clear to the imperial authorities. So they were doing the same thing that they tried to do with El Güegüense, outlaw it. They tried to ban indigenous expressions. So indigenous people, in order to resist, decided, oh, well, it's not a deer. You can't fault me. It's not a deer. It's a horse. It's completely different. Meanwhile, everyone who's watching knows exactly what's going on. So it's not even just the trickery in the language and in the words that El Güegüense, that this trickster uses, but they went so far as to hide a sacred ritual of their own people in this play, to have it out in the open. And they even talk about it. They openly talk about it. They make reference after the machos are done dancing. El Güegüense, they parade through, and El Güegüense asks his sons, how's this one's, the word translates to heart girth. So like for the part in the saddle that goes across your chest, closest organ to that is a heart. So he's asking if its heart girth has healed. So, and yeah, it's healed up. And then the second one, he asks about another part of the saddle, which is right next to the kidneys, which kidneys also traditionally have been a sacrificial item. And so he talks about that, asks if its kidneys have healed. And the son says, yes, they have. And then the last one, and this is played very much for jokes, he asks about one of them apparently has a swelling in its penis, a affliction, which this, interestingly enough, this affliction shows up again in the deer dances in Guatemala. So, it's very much played for jokes of like, you're gonna, that it's all swollen, you're gonna have to lance it and get all the fluid out. And they're like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. But what we see here and how this can be interpreted is if those last two, the heart and the kidney, are well-established items of sacrifice, then, well, this one is actually too. And we have evidence of it being this way. All throughout Mesoamerica, we have references to bloodletting of the penis as a part of sacrifice. And we have the first Spanish folk to chronicle anything in Nicaragua. They talk about this happening at 3 different festivals of this same type of ritual bloodletting. So, I mean, 2's a line, 3's a pattern, isn't it? And even though this is played for jokes and for laughs, absolutely, ritual can be funny. Ritual can be hilarious. And so all of this blends together in even the resistance is multi-layered that this performance has. It's not just resistance in the storyline itself of what El Güegüense is doing, but the performers themselves are actively resisting their colonizers by performing their rituals right in front of the Spanish, who would not have wanted them to do that at all. So I know I probably ate into way too much time on all of that. So I do want to thank you very much for your time with that. And again, if if you wanted to get in contact, there's my information there, and I'm going to give the floor over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That I love this. I just simply, there's no other words to see how I feel about this. I think whenever you decide and you have a chance to have this as one of your courses in whatever university you happen to be in the world, I'll try to sign up and be there. Trust me, I'll get very ill from work, Ambassador, just so I can go and register in that course. But it's fascinating to learn more about that, how interconnected our cultures were, how there is a depth in it. I mean, not beyond just the trickery and the element of resistance, but how many layers it has. And this is why it's such a fascinating topic. And thank you so much for brilliantly presenting the highlights of what it is. It's very deep concept and deep story that keeps on giving, I'm sure, as your research goes. And we'll get into in the questions section a little bit more, and I'm sure people will have questions and would like to learn a little bit more about it. But as time is of essence and time never stops, we would move on to the next speaker of today's event, Nicolas Melillo. Nicolas Melillo is a master cigar maker and owner of Foundation Cigars. At least that's his official title. In my personal interactions and my little understanding that it starts of the cigar industry, he's a lot more than that. And he's a very humble man in the way he describes himself. But Nicolas, I had a chance of meeting him a couple of years ago in a very emblematic place, I think, for many, at least in British history or British iconography, in Highclere Castle, where he was introducing the cigar line that he had made for Lord Cavendish and the Highclere Castle cigar. So since then, I followed and I try to learn. But all in all, he's traveled the world procuring tobacco. He's toiled in factories overseeing production, blended some of the top-rated and best-selling cigars in the industry, and he fell in love with Nicaragua and in El Güegüense in the process. Nicolas has over 20 years of love and dedication for the industry, and with established production in the beautiful valley of Estelí, which is nowadays the epicenter, the cigar capital of the world. So Foundation Cigars merges all world traditions with modern day styles and customs to produce unique premium cigars. El Güegüense, and this is where the segue comes in, as I'm learning from my professor Paul, or the Wiseman, was actually his debut cigar and the initial line that was blended under Melillo for Foundation Cigars. It's a 100% Nicaraguan blend. It was in the top 25 cigar aficionado. And for those who are less aficionados than I am for cigars, and many of you who know me know how much I love them, and I will tell you why. It's not just taste. It's sort of getting into the Oscars of cigars, essentially. They're aged in cedar humidors for 60 days before being shipped from Estelí, ensuring that the wise man, the Güegüense cigar, celebrate the Nicaraguan people, our land, and our culture. Now, you might be wondering, well, okay, we get the idea of El Güegüense, that is the cigar line. We get that the moderator, Ricardo, seems to really love cigars, but why? Why cigars? And I think that's where we want to demystify and almost decolonize some thoughts and ideas. And one of them is that Nicaragua in itself, the heritage and the tradition of tobacco, a tobacco plant as a whole, this is millenary. Way beyond the Spaniards, obviously, and way before it became a popular product in Cuba in the 1800s. In the 1700s, we exported it to Spain right after the colonization, and the 16th century as well. But it was a very special plant, a very special product that allowed our people, or Montgomery people, or Mayan people, or the people in Nicaragua and whole Mesoamerican parts of South America to speak with the gods. Is a very deep device, artifact, if you wish, to connect with the subconscious, or what's beyond. It was a product that was consumed for inspiration, by the shamans before getting more spiritual depth into their discussions. But also it was also consumed by the warriors before going to fight. So there's something really, really deep. And today, the reason why we bring it in is because as well, same as El Güegüense, and we Nicaraguans, anyone, you can see very quickly how proud we are, to the extent that we might even say if it's from Diriomo or Diriamba, doesn't matter, but we do own it so much and love it so much that we feel it in our hearts. But cigars as well. So cigars, right now, Nicaragua is the biggest cigar producing country in the world. It has the most amount of accolades, and it has become an element of pride in all of us. It's one of the products that we make best than anybody else at the moment. And I think that speaks volumes of what it is. And I'll let Nick take us a little bit more and introduce a different dimension into the Güegüense that, again, it links into the art of cigar making, everything, all the artistry that goes around the cigar making process itself, and in a way also the business side of it, which I think is interesting as well, how it came about. So with that, Nick, as we becoming now saying, the virtual floor is yours, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. It's a great pleasure to be here, Ambassador Morales. Thank you guys for having me. Paul, that was unbelievable. I really enjoyed that. It's sometimes difficult to get information, through research, and it was really fascinating to hear your talk. Nicaragua is a very special place to me. I'm not Nicaraguan. I was born in the United States in Connecticut, which is also a cigar producing state in the United States, and has a very deep history with indigenous cultures also. Cigars brought me to Nicaragua in 2003. I had worked a cigar shop in Connecticut while I was going to university, and then got a job offer to move my life to Nicaragua in March of 2003. So it's now actually this month, 18 years ago, I think just last week, when I moved to Nicaragua. And I didn't know much about Nicaragua before moving there. I knew about cigars, and that was about it. And since that time, moving there as a foreigner, I don't think I would have stayed in Nicaragua as long as I've had if it wasn't for the people. The people of Esteli welcomed me as family into Esteli, and really showed me love as a foreigner for their country and culture. And I really immersed myself in the process of becoming a cigar maker, but also, there's not many foreigners at the time that lived in Esteli. So I really got immersed in the culture. And that's about the time when I met, who you'll hear from a little later on, Alex García. I met Alex around the same time in 2003, 2004. So, over a 12-year period, I ran a little cigar factory, which eventually became the largest cigar factory in Nicaragua. Until about 2014, I decided to spread my wings and start my own cigar company. I thought it was time to really develop my own brands. I had always been on the production, fermentation, the growing side of things. So I really wanted to launch my own company and also produce brands of things that really were important in my life. And I couldn't think of another brand imagery to really express my experience in Nicaragua than El Güegüense. I knew as my first project in 2015, I wanted to do a blend that was 100% Nicaraguan. Those who don't know, there's tobaccos that come from across the world that make up a blend. Nicaragua makes some of the best filler and wrapper tobaccos in the world. Sometimes we use different wrapper leaves or tobaccos from other countries, Connecticut being one, Mexico. But as my first project, I really wanted to express to connoisseurs and cigar smokers throughout the United States and the world what Nicaragua means to me. And anyone, living in Nicaragua, you see Güegüense everywhere. You'll see it in restaurants. You'll see it on murals. Alex and I did a number of murals around Esteli with the Güegüense. So I brought the project to Alex, and knowing Alex for so many years, we have a lot of similar interest in history and culture and music. And I brought the project to Alex and told him what my idea was, and that I really wanted to capture the heart and soul of Nicaragua in the Güegüense. And, being in the United States, in the market, in the cigar market, there's not a lot of times maybe you'll see brands that have maybe history or culture. There's different brands that gear towards the American consumer cigar smoker. So it was really important for me to share, culture and history. So I went to Alex, I gave him the idea, and Alex started to really create over a year some incredible images. I knew, you know, myself not being from Nicaragua, it was important to do this justice. You know, I didn't want to do something that people would, you know, be kind of upset with. It had to be perfect. So we put our all into developing this first brand. And I'll show you here a little bit of the imagery. Actually, Ricardo, is it all right if I bring Alex in and have him share some imagery?
I think that's a brilliant idea. And if I may just very briefly, so you touch upon Alex, but Alex Garcia from Esteli is the Foundation Cigars art director, man behind the company's collectible cigar boxes and brands. He's known as the thief operandi, which I love that, his artistic handle. And he has been a street artist in Nicaragua since '97. His painting celebrates life, culture, and folklore through rich, striking colors. His Colectivo Atol's work has helped establish Foundation's branding as an attraction all of his own. And today, Thief Operandi continues to develop new media and design. So with that out of the way, so people get a bit more of a context of who Alex is, another fellow Nicaraguan, please, yes, by all means, go ahead. Thank you.
So you just guys know, you know, the imagery that we use, what I think we kind of learned a little later, and I think Paul can to add to some of this, is actually a combination and fusion between Güegüense and Toro Huaco. I'd actually love to hear Paul's thought on it, but there was, you know, it was interesting because, again, finding information was difficult. So there's, I think, a little fusion between the two. Alex, I'll give you the floor.
Hello, everybody, and hello, Ambassador, and all the people that invite us also make this possible. My name is Alex García. I'm the art director from Foundation Cigar. And well, I'm a street artist too here in my native city, Esteli. I've been doing a lot of artwork over the street and bringing to the people different perspective of what could be a street art. At the very first stage, in the past, I just make some like regular graffiti, and I was trying to like just mimic, for quite say, murals from outside the country. But as soon as I start involved with Nicolas and everything, I kind of like start thinking and seeing and trying to look into the past of Nicaragua and trying to implement all these elements from the Isla Zapatera and the anthropomorphic figures into my murals. From there, I met Nicolas and he presented me this project, and I was fascinated because I saw in the industry that nobody was doing this. We have like a quite long history in industry tobacco, and from there he gave me the first idea and what he wanted, but at the very first stage I didn't know how to like complement everything, and I started to doing like more research and trying to doing more drawings and trying to implement elements that could be working over a cigar box, right? Well, here I prepared like a kind of like a quick document and what it was the first design that we have for a Güegüense. We kind of, Nicolas at the very first idea, he was told me like, listen, I want something that represents Nicaragua like with the heart and soul. So we choose, I kind of like choose ¿cómo se llama? Toro Huaco. And then the Macho Raton to implement in the main vista. If you can see here, I started making some like a rough sketches with a kind of like a paint. Excuse me here. So from there, we implement here the Sacuanjocha, that is kind of like the symbol of immortality here in Nicaragua, and it's a national flower. And there we implement some coins representing the like kind of like the treasure and symbols of Nicaragua culture. In the middle of the vista, we have here the macho raton that is the main theme of this line. And well, it's kind of like excuse me here. It's kind of like a nice representation of everything. So we prepare like a kind of for 6 months, all the sketching, the ideas, and we combine it and trying to make something different. It was kind of like very difficult at the very beginning, the name, and choose the name of the, because of the pronunciation of the Güegüense, because it's an Nahuatl word, and it's not quite like very easy to pronunciate for the foreign people, right? Here,
but you can imagine, you know, coming out with the brand to the market of, you know, Güegüense for, you know, people that don't even speak, you know, we know it's not a Spanish word, but that don't even speak Spanish. I think the market kind of looked at me as, you know, what are you doing? No one's going to be able to pronounce this. But that's, for me, it was so important that people know the word, whether they can't pronounce it, just to see the word because of its importance, you know, not only to Nicaragua, but also as a cultural treasure to the world. And then also I knew, you know, the people that are really into, you know, cigar smoking and the brands would actually appreciate it. And then also look into, you know, what is this about? What is more about Nicaragua? That's really what, you know, the branding for Alex and I is to use as a medium to transmit you know, messages of history, messages of culture. You know, so it has many layers. Some people might not get into it as much. Others, you know, there's different levels to it. And if you really look into the vista there of the brand, you can see the national flower, the national tree. There's also little writing there on the left and right, which you can't really see, but it starts something like Nicaragua, Nicaraguita, I think is the words we put on there. Right, Alex?
yeah, well, that was like a kind of like a small element that we sort of like put it there. And
there's some hidden elements.
See, let's move on to the bofeton. Bofeton is kind of like a presentation card of the history and what it mean the Güegüense, right? So in this presentation, I made a sketch. And this is, I was trying to make like a dancing, like a march towards to the future, and you can see I integrate in the characters the people are smoking cigars too, because that's an element that links the culture and the earth of Nicaragua. So we're trying to I was trying to make it more like more like subtle, more like artistical part, so that people can see it. And when you open the box, you feel like it's something special. So you have something to read and understand a little bit more what it means, the culture of and the dancing of Güegüense. And well, from an artistic point, I was making this idea for several months and trying to present to the people outside of the country and with a respectful way that what the culture is. If you can see here, after a while, that was going through all the process of the making, the design, in the process, we kind of like have the final product and look up from some place that they can print it like the right way. And at that time, we will have like a kind of like lucky have around here a company that bring all this artwork to a life. So this is the first picture of the presentation of the product. If you see here, we have this. Excuse me, the noise. We have the cigar rings. With some elements of foil and gold that represent to the like kind of the trajes, I don't know how to say it of the Güegüense over the cigar ring. And here we got an extension. this is kind of like a chronologic pictures of the first product. And we decide after that to change it and have an extension line that called the wise men, so the people in the foreign people understand what was the meaning of Güegüense, because it's kind of like it was very hard to the people understand the Nahuatl word. Here I have another artwork for the 5 years anniversary of the first line. And here I make this illustration and kind of like representing the 5 volcanoes of here in Nicaragua and the whole soil and tobacco plants. And I was kind of like trying to make like a paint, like como le dice, dashed type of style, like an old school feeling, and the people, so the people can feel a little bit more the culture. Is here we have the ultimate chest that maybe Nicola can explain a little bit more.
Paul, maybe actually Paul can shed a little light. Paul, this inspiration for this box came from it came from one of the machos carries in his hands what looks like a chest, and I've never gotten a real perfect good explanation of what that is. Are you able to?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's actually pretty interesting, and I did try those cigars over the weekend, and they are fantastic, I have to say.
Oh, great.
So yeah, one of the big parts about Güegüense is the kind of deception that is going on is Güegüense is going to be basically thrown in jail because basically he's trying to come into town with a bunch of goods, and the Spanish want their cut. So one of the big parts of this is he regales the governor with a number of different objects, and like interestingly, a lot of the objects that he talks about aren't things that are actually real. They just sound beautiful and fancy. So like sometimes when you see it, they like go with the box, kind of like casually open it and do that thing where it's like, I open just enough for you to know it's open, but not enough for you to see it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Interesting. So is it correct in saying that one of the Güegüense sons at the time was saying that he was poor, the other one was saying he was rich? Is that
yes
correct? Okay.
One of the sons plays along with Güegüense's jokes, and the other is just absolutely not having it.
Okay. And are the machos part of that, displaying the wealth of the Güegüense?
Yeah, they're kind of brought in carrying some of the goods.
Okay.
So yeah, that's definitely a bit of a part of it. Yeah.
Alex, can you go back to the 5-year chest? So we just had our 5-year anniversary. So this box was done as a special limited edition box for the Güegüense, being our first brand in the market. And so that is the inspiration came from the machos carrying this sort of treasure chest, I'll call it. And then as you see, this is sort of like a box within a box. It's a 20 count. There's 2 other boxes within it. And the inspiration for that actually came from an old cigar box from the early 1920s, which I had been gifted by a good friend of mine. So, Alex just did an amazing job with the artwork, and luckily we have some great partners in Esteli that are able to do some incredible printing on the wood of these boxes. And then Alex, if you can go to the Güegüense, the original. And you can see from the original, this was, again, also an inspiration on some of the old Cuban brands. This kind of box dress, Alex, if you can go to the Güegüense box, the original to the right. Keep going. Yeah, that one. So that is what we call a full dress box within the cigar world. If you see the edges is what we call filetes. That is a full Cuban style box packaging, which there's a famous brand called Romeo and Julieta from Cuba. So we kind of took that inspiration from that full dress box to make this, uniquely Nicaraguan at the same time, distinctly, Nicaraguan, the flowers, the tree, and then the full dress of the box. So, yeah. Alex, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I have some other words. Well, my intention as an artist, excuse me, I think we're gonna have a little noise. After I'm been working over the streets, and I was developed as an artist. I cannot be aware. Just sorry about this noise. Just give me a minute.
Sure, I think there's some
like regular
sales going on in the street.
That's Güegüense, Nicaragua coming to life. You broadcasting Nicaraguan sound bites to the whole world.
Live and
Yeah,
direct.
that's a regular noise. Well, I was saying my intention of the very first stage of when Nicolas brought me this project, it wasn't not for sale, trying to get into the business. It was more like me trying to condense all the cultural heritage of Nicaragua in one box. I never expect in the future that people will love it after it was done. So I quite think that's why the main reason that people feel like a kind of like proud, because it wasn't intended to be just for sale. It was more for give culture to the people. It's kind of like the same when I made a mural in the street. You have like an open culture for all the people, have access to the art to all the people in the streets. So I make a kind of like a more research after they started doing this, and I feel like all the path that we have around 5-6 years is quite interesting, because I was developed different thinking and trying to, well, I will continue studying and try to condense it and trying to make it more easy to the people from outside of the country to understand it and give the proper position of what is El Güegüense international countries.
Just like to add two things too. Both cigars received top 25 cigar aficionado honors, which cigar aficionado is really the Bible within the cigar industry of some of the top cigars in the world. So the Güegüense Maduro, which is the darker wrapper, received number 3 cigar of the year 2 years ago, which was a huge honor. But it was also just great to see the exposure for Nicaragua and the Güegüense and the brand to bring awareness to it. Also, as you can see the masks behind me, this wasn't staged just for this call. Those are up all the time, but those masks were carved by the Flores family, which I'd like to mention in Diriamba. When I first went to see the Güegüense for the first time, the masks were just incredible, the craftsmanship. And I had asked somebody in the street, who makes the masks? And someone had mentioned, go by the cemetery 2.5 blocks to the east, and you'll find a little house. And that's where one of the oldest mask makers in Nicaragua. So I ventured up the street and came across this very humble household of the Flores family, which I'll just, let's see if I can share my screen. And Mr. Flores, I think was close to 90, his grandson and his daughter. And to my understanding, he was 3 or 4 generations of mask makers in Nicaragua. So it was a real honor that they ended up in 2015 carving about 30 masks for us for our trade show, the cigar trade show, which is where we launched the company in New Orleans that year. So we had the Casa de Cultura sign off on all the masks. We actually also made 3 5-foot wooden statues they carved for us of the different characters in the Güegüense. And we had those at our trade show when we launched the company, which was, we wanted to bring a piece of Nicaragua to cigar smokers and not just share, the wonderful cigars, but also the amazing culture that Nicaragua has to offer.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's nothing short of amazing, inspiring, and simply beautiful how that initial visits and how it became a love story, and how the work that both of you have put together and complementing each other's strengths to come up with such a beautiful line that I remember the first time I saw it, I just couldn't believe it. For a moment, it took me a couple of moments to realize that these were cigars we're talking about. This wasn't an artwork in a museum. So the level of artistry that you as a master blender brings, and those who know how that sort of making magic, you have to be sort of making a combination, an alchemia of blends to create something fantastic, the same way Alex was able to incorporate. And what sounds like a beautiful also story and experience here is that it allowed both of you and Alex as a Nicaraguan, more from the northern region of the country, to learn more about his own history. And I think that's one of the biggest accomplishments of why we wanted to showcase this product that you created and your story, because it allows people to spark an interest, like you said, a curiosity, want to learn more about it. Might not be the easiest sell for people in some countries when they have to say it, but that wasn't your priority, and that's the beauty of it. So that's something that we as Nicaraguans are really grateful for, and I'm sure the ambassador will have more comments to make now that she's had a chance to see a little bit more of what you describe and you've done. But ultimately, I have to say that not only does this bring an opportunity for our culture to grow and be distributed and consume and learn and come alive, but at the same time, the cigar industry does bring about a third of the jobs in the free trade zone system of my country are directly linked to the exports of cigars, and it's one of our largest exports in the world. So the whole consumption of this artisanal heritage trade, this is a craft that, in my view, it should be also inscribed as an intangible heritage of the world. The cigar making artistry in itself is like the carpenters in the Netherlands, or some people in other kind of artistry and trade. So hopefully one day we'll get to have both in the list of those. But with that, we'll answer a couple of the questions afterwards, but we would like to give the ambassador an opportunity to give us her reflections. In her case, as some of you may have noticed, she smiled when she saw the Flores families. When you tell her the address of the house by el cementerio, 2 cuadras para allá, that's the country. She knows exactly what you're talking about. So without further ado, and with a big thank to both of you, and honestly, Alex, what you've done since 1997, I think that inspiration to all young people in Nicaragua and people who want to do art, I think you showcase what determination and dedication can accomplish. And look at where you are, my friend.
Thanks.
It's
Yeah,
incredible.
thanks.
You are an inspiration. So thank you. Ambassador, the floor is yours, please.
Yes, thank you, Ricardo. And I'm truly amazed, Nicholas and Alex, for the amazing boxes that you design, and more than that, how you put together two, I will say, ancestral, that something that comes from beyond the colonial, which is the cigar, the tobacco, and the essence of what, as explained by Paul, Dr. Montgomery, comes from even before the colonial era. You know, the form, the dance, and that later became Güegüense, but it comes both, comes before even the colonial times. So also I was clear where you say the address and the house of Mr. Flores, because I live like 4 or 5 blocks from them, in the same street that goes straight to the cemetery. So, it was part, every time you go to the cemetery on 2nd of this November, on Dia de Muertos, on the Day of the Dead, you needed to pass in front of the house, of course. Nice. And everybody, for humanity, for many people, the Güegüense, this first theater plant of the American colonial as an oral and intangible heritage is intangible. It's something, very a concept. But you manage to actually make it real, touchable, be seen by the world. And that is something that I have, because born and raised in the Diamba, this heritage for me is not something distant, it's not esoteric, it's tangible, it's mine. So it is in my heart, it is in my mind, it is in my in everything that I am. So Paul and Ricardo mentioned that this was a expression of, the latest version, the version we know of the Güegüense post-colonial. It was against the colonial rule. It was against, but more than was against, Paul explained, it was a resistance and the preservation of our real, of our patrimony. Indigenous patrimony. So that is, I'm very proud to say that although the play is, you can see it everywhere, is the Diamba that has, kept it pretty much alive. And its own, in the streets, dance and play by people that are not actors, that they learn from their fathers, because this is a promise they made to the saint to play it in the street, to become part of the Güegüense play. And I grew up watching this comedy play created somewhere in the streets, probably a small colonial town, village, governed by the Spanish authority, inhabited by indigenous and mestizo people, probably somewhere between Masaya, Carazo, Granada, where Paul mentioned Monimbo, where Masaya is, where it is in Masaya. And there is, and it remembered that every Sunday in the atrium of the church, the one that you, Ricardo, no, who put you, Nicolas, put the picture of the church, or Ricardo put the picture of the church with the Güegüense. So I remember that exactly there. I remember that every Sunday, the promising people, the people who had to pay a promise to the saint, gathered together to learn the parliament, to get the dialogues, to recite them, to practice the dance and the sounds and the music, and which they were later interpreted in the street during the feast in January. And they went, I remember they went in the streets of the Diamba, house by house, everywhere where there was a fiesta dedicated to the saint, they came and it was an obligation to play, because that was what they that they promised to the saint. So this is there is centuries of tradition here, and it's a cultural mix. It is resistant of the indigenous and mestizo in the face of the inability to oppose and the imposed submission, and they conceal its indigenous being, Chorotega, Nahuatl traditions and rituals, and then this comes alive as a colorful expression. I also recall very clearly enjoying the funny, interesting play that make this a comic ballet because it's a ballet, because there is a dance also. And so the dialogue, the music, the dance, but above all, the amazing custom. So you have the let me show you. This is one of them. This is the macho that you were talking, they also were talking about. And then you have here another. So this is one of the other characters in the play. So they have around eight characters. So you have the governor Tastuanes that actually, is the chief of the town. So you have the Güegüense, the wise man, and you have the clerk, the royal assistant, you have the three women, La Suche Malinche, and two others. And then you have the four horses, or, the machos, what we call it machos, four horses that are the ones who actually dance, and kick and do all the rituals that Paul was talking about, becoming them, becoming, the men becoming the macho, becoming, challenging the rulers. So that when you see that every year of your life, you are part of that. You are that. You become that. So, but Diriamba was always known as a very, very, since Dirian Hen before was very, I would say, challenging the rulers. And Diriamba, was in every anti-Somoza movement. There was Diriamba there. So this new, this anti-colonial element also became then an anti-Somocist element too. And Paul show you, the Molotov men, and show you a macho dancing. And one of the movement of the macho is precisely very much, when they do the dance, one of the movements, it's pretty much like they were throwing something. So that came to, so now what is, so it's not just an intangible and material cultural heritage. It's an actual element of what Nicaragua is, what Nicaraguan are. So you can see this, as I said, in many, performing many traditions, but here is about preserving. It's about the future, where we see this in the future, and the things that Nicholas is doing, the research of Paul about the where it comes from, and the work of the government of fostering the dance in Diriamba, because we actually support the dancers every year, and what is called the Royal Indigenous Council of our Holy Mother Church, and is indigenous mayor of the Brotherhood, who need to sanction who is going to be in the play every year. So who is going to pay the promise to the saint is something that we think it's about maintaining, sustaining, and fostering our identity for the future. The play that is also make it let's say, so everybody knows it, everybody learn about, everybody understand what it is, and that's how we can preserve it and have it and continue actually being immaterial cultural heritage for the humanity. So I will, you can see it in the videos, of course. You can see the play in the streets of, in the theaters in Nicaragua, and many in other festivities also dedicated to San Sebastian. But only in Diriamba you will see it coming alive and performed by the descendants of its creators, the inhabitants of Diriamba. So and you can go also to see where the masks are being made by these amazing handcrafters of Nicaragua. So I invite you to come and see it and experience what we are, what I am as a Nicaraguan too. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Very, very moving and powerful words. Something stronger than personal and honest and your own experience to share what it meant, what it means for you, what it means for all of us. And very important point to highlight the future, how to preserve it, how do we as a government create initiatives and programs to be able to support the initiatives and projects that are doing so. And with that, before we open it for it's going to be a very short Q&A because we've run out of time, but we'll have at least one or two quick questions that the audience has asked us. But before we do it, I wanted to play you just a little bit of the festival that Ambassador mentioned that takes place every year in the city of Diriamba that is supported by the government of Nicaragua. So I'll share my screen and present that to you briefly. And what I wanted to highlight in that video, if you saw the first one was sort of performed in sort of a preparation, rehearsal right in front of the St. Sebastian Church, right in the main square of Diriamba. This is actually what you saw now. It's that symbiosis of all the arts. So you saw people in the festival painting, and you saw people expressing the arts in different ways, all inspired by Güegüense, and then you get to see it in the streets, which is beautiful as well. But let's not forget as well, this is an artwork, and it's a piece of theater that also gets performed in the Rubén Darío Theater in Nicaragua's most important theater, and around the world as well. So you can see it at the highest level of artistry in a fantastic space like a theater. You can walk in the streets of Diriamba and see it live there. You can see it in the boxes of cigars of Nicolás Melillo. You can see it in the artwork of Alex García. You can see it in the streets. As the ambassador said, we hope that incites you to and invites you to come and visit us. So with that, we have two questions. And so if you allow me, I will jump into that. We have wonderful comments as well, really positive, precisely what you wanted to achieve, to get people interested and curious and realizing how alive it is. So we have wonderful comments from Geraldine, thank you, Luke Daniels. We have actually comments as well of congratulations from Scott Vines, who is the owner of Tory Imports, who imports cigars for Nicolas and various other brands from Nicaragua and from the whole New World cigar, from Honduras, it's Mexico, Dominican Republic. And what you can see here, the question that comes from Helen. Helen has a question that I think has a bit of relevance and connection to a question you sort of hinted at, Nicolas, and it comes between the distinction of emblematic figures within our folklore. So one of them, I will start with that one, if I may, and perhaps Paul, you want to chip in on that one. But a lot of us, and in my case, for example, I was always fascinated above everything with El Toro Huaco. So the one with the peacock feathers in their hats and the sound is very different. The music, the ambassador is holding it, and it's a very different sound, and it's a different dance altogether. But they go very close to each other. So in a child's mind, it's hard to separate them. You almost see them as one. And in many ways, seeing the artwork that Alex and Nicolas put together, you can see the symbiosis and emerging, if anything, of those two characters. But how different are they, and how related they are? Would you be able to say, Paul, at least from your perspective?
Yeah. So that one actually has a little bit of, at least visually, there are some similarities to it and a performance that used to be done in Guanacaste in Costa Rica up until about the 1900s, when the church decided that it was far too pagan to be allowed to continue on. And its name translated to the whip. And it was basically men would take the tendon of usually a tapir, like a tapir, the animal, the tendon from its penis, and beat each other with those like it was a whip until somebody started bleeding. And that has a very, 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 again, that's another thing. I can't remember off the top of my head. There's an event in Nicaragua that is somewhat similar, but people wear red flower kind of hat, and the name to it escapes me, but there are a lot of these visual similarities that go between different Chorotega people from Nicaragua and in Costa Rica. So if you can if people separated by hundreds and hundreds of miles and by an administrative border have a similar kind of expression, then it's very likely that expression existed before any of those borders existed. So yeah, I think there's, I couldn't necessarily say that they're part of the same exact, kind of ritual. I mean, but again, there were 3 different festivals that were mentioned in the earliest records that had similar elements to it, but they were completely different celebrations. So I can just say that, yeah, it looks like those are equally kind of old expressions, which tie into similar elements, but yeah, they're probably not exactly the same holiday, just, have similarities going for them.
Thank you.
There is something that I want to say about the Torohuaco. When you mentioned, the part, the use of the deer, and then becoming, the horse, use as, So in the Torohuaco dance, when they go in the streets, they are the Spanish. They are all Spanish, mm-hmm. But there is what we call it the vaca. There is that it's actually going after mm-hmm. Spanish. So there is that element of the animal, being confronting the Spanish. Mm-hmm. So I never understood exactly the meaning until I met you, and I said, yeah, that makes sense. It's because there is no parliament here it's just music. It's just very, very, very indigenous percussion. Mm-hmm. It's just a flauta and the drum, a very small drum. Used to be for years and years, it's just one person. So doing that, and different dances, but just the same person playing the drum and the flute. So this is, I think, it's not exactly related, not exactly, connected intrinsically, but they are culturally connected and
Absolutely
historically connected, and from the resistance part also, the decolonization part, I think it's connected there too, and it will, you could actually say it is interesting that both Torohuaco and the Güegüense are played also in Diriamba.
Yes, and Toro Venado as well.
Toro Venado,
yeah.
in Masaya and all that. So it's the use of the animal to show your true self. It's
yeah, they're going over the same themes. They're the same cultural elements, the same themes that keep showing up.
No, thank you both for answering that and giving us your insights. And that related to a question that Helen made, that she was actually she's very familiar with León, which is, again, it's a bit more on the northwest side of the country. For many of you who know, some of the best rum in the world comes from León, aside from being the birthplace of the man who changed the Spanish language, Rubén Darío, and being a very revolutionary city. But she asked us about La Gigantona. So she was wondering if there was any relationship with the big giant woman that also those of you who've had a chance to look at a bit of folkloric videos of Nicaragua would have come across, and perhaps even attended some of the events that have been done here in the UK with the big giant woman, La Gigantona, and the dwarf men get dance in the streets. So I would sort of imagine there is an element of similar answer you gave us in terms of the relationship of being, yes, from the same sort of cultural baskets, but different dances. But I'm not sure if you have anything else to add or any knowledge at all in terms of what La Gigantona is not a deer woman, it's not a horse. It's something altogether different, but we would love to. I know it's a bit sidetracking, but I think it adds the value to the conversation. I'm not sure if Paul, and then I will let Alex also chime in on a comment, but let's see if Paul can give us his thoughts on La Gigantona and the relationship.
Yeah, so I think those two, that one, it's considerably different from what we see with kind of these deer performances. I mean, I'll just flat out say that all those other ones are connected through that element of the deer. But this one, while it does seem like it does have some, early colonial elements to it, it's really similar to a lot of kind of performances that you'd see in parts of Spain hundreds of years ago. So more likely, and the fact that it is from one of the the old colonial cities, it seems that it's more of its roots have a little bit more to do with a Spanish influence than sure, the indigenous dwarf as a figure does show up as well time to time, but I don't know. I haven't done nearly enough research to be confident and say that dwarf, that one is representing something that is incredibly old, or if it's just an element that was in part maybe inspired by encounters with indigenous people. But it seems to be a bit more that this is of colonial Spanish than indigenous work.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate your insights on that one. I think Alex, but I'm not sure if Ambassador, did you have a comment you wanted to make on this?
Quickly, is that I don't know, maybe I give Alex the floor so he can, because I wanted to mention something about Hilo Azul. So it's another thing that I wanted to say something.
Thank you, Ambassador. Alex, if you wanted to share with us an insight, a comment, please go for it.
Yeah, I have a comment about the Torohuaco dance. It's kind of like something like in the dances, it represents, he kind of like dance like a snake. And this is kind of like an origin, it's kind of like a represent in the dance of the Quetzalcoatl. So that's the main meaning of his doing this movement in the Toro Waco dance. Also, he have a chichil, that's the sound of a snake. So this is kind of like the same theme, like we're talking about resistance of the culture against the Spaniard encounter. And we also got the connection of the old Mesoamerican there, because they always implementing the Quetzalcoatl or la serpiente emplumada in Spanish, that is all the way from across from the Mayan from Mexico to Central America.
Yeah, and there are depictions of the plumed serpent at a cliff face overlooking lake. We would call it Lake Managua, but different names. So that image is absolutely present throughout pre-Hispanic Nicaraguan imagery, full front up in there as well. Absolutely.
Indeed. And there's an element, it's almost a hypnotic trance-like music. If you listen to the music, it's really kind of dictating a certain pace and taking you somewhere else really, really quickly. That's really, really interesting. You mentioned that, Alex. And also the point that there is an element of resistance, not only in the Nicaraguan people, and it's something Paul and I have spoken at length in English pubs and other venues of great names, but it's the element of resistance also against other empires of the region, against the Mayan Empire, against the Aztec Empire. So let's not forget, in the case of Nicaragua, the reason why you don't see pyramids and you don't see big empire building like the Egyptians and other cultures that wanted to submit others to their empire and their will is because there was almost a level of proto-democratic system in many ways in place, where you had chieftains, local people guiding and leading their people, not that dissimilar to what you would see in parts of the United States as well, and some of the different peoples from the Americas and North Americas as well. And I think, like what Alex said, is we were resisting also the Mayans, and we were resisting the Spanish, and then we were resisting the dictators in the case of Somoza, and resisting intervention from the United States in the 80s and before. So there is an element of that throughout all of our history, and we're still resisting. I'm going to have to, Mas, if you allow me, because I know you wanted to say some last words. I'll let Nicolas, if you mind, say
just
something.
one quick thing. I know we're running low. So I'm just wondering if Ambassador or Paul have ever heard of LiDAR imaging technology. So LiDAR, they just flew this imaging technology over Tikal in Guatemala, where they have these very famous, they have this famous pyramid, but they're able to see through this radar from a plane through the jungle, and they've discovered 60,000 other pyramid structures, roads. So it's just always been my feeling, and I've said this amongst different friends, that Nicaragua, I feel, have some potentially, maybe there is some pyramid structures or something in the western part of the country. Just a suggestion, Ambassador, if you can find, get in contact with the cultural studies to fly some of this technology over, the jungles in Nicaragua, you could potentially discover some, kind of world-changing artifacts. Just my 2 cents.
No, that's a valid point, and we will always, that's a wonder that we have, and we had some connection with the British Museum in regard to that. They have actually lots of artifacts here that they don't have it in display because there is not enough space, and they, in fact, from the whole Latin America, that is not displayed. We only have the Mexican and the North American area, but yeah, it's something that we could start motivating. Actually, a few years ago, in the Cambridge journals of archaeology, they reported that they discovered the burial of a woman that actually was very has very, very old. So there are elements that could be, and it was very well preserved. That was in the Caribbean south side of the country. So it could be very interesting. So just to finish, I just want to recall the hilo azul. I just wanted to mention the hilo azul, that it's the Mesoamerica, but it's also North America, in Mesoamerica, that put together, elements that connect us all. And just a thought is, why Rubén Darío, the Chorotega, the big Chorotega, he, our biggest poet that came, never was shy about his Chorotega heritage, said, put the first book of poetry was called Azul, blue. And I don't know if that comes from, because blue can have many meanings in poetry. It maybe could be a stricter poetry, but maybe it also had this, reflection of, this connection of the whole Americas. He was considered a poet. Is not a Nicaraguan, he's an international poet now. But he opened, he changed the Spanish word. He conquered the Spanish language. So it's I like to think that it has some sort of connection, and we'll see. But indeed, we are connected. We are all the indigenous people, and our heritage is connected. And blue is something that connects us all. There are elements. The blue is in the añil, in the way our indigenous people used to have this beautiful handcraft, and also the blue that is used in the in San Juan de Oriente by traditionalist craft makers. So I think, with this, I will say we have a future if we continue to use the resistance of the cultural resistance, that means Güegüense. We have a future as a Nicaraguans to be proud of.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those closing remarks. But before we close the event, we'd love to give, I'm not sure if there's any final comments. Nicholas is itching his hand to make a comment, and it would be cruel of me not to let him have a comment on his.
Oh, no, I think that was still up from the last time.
Okay.
Yeah, but I just want to say thank you all. It's been an amazing experience. I feel honored to be invited, and really appreciate all of you.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Final remarks. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ambassador.
No. It's just to say thank you to all, and thank you to good friends that I am seeing that are here today, that took the time, to recognize, for example, Jose Oribe, who is the director executive of International Sugar Organization of Guatemala himself, and also to Professor Adam Feinstein and Jerome Cawthorn and Helen Yule and Scott and everyone who Brenda Trejos, a Nicaraguan who lives here, so thank you to all of them, but particularly to you for the time, for the passion about Güegüense, for the passion about my country, and for let's continue this dialogue. I think, there is a lot more to say.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And that was very timely. And the comment on the Hilo Azul. So keep tuned on our embassy, social media, and different platforms, as we will hopefully be able to deep dive a little bit more into what the Hilo Azul, the blue thread, is all about. So that's coming soon. Who knows? That might even inspire a new cigar line from our good friend Nicolas Melillo. There's so many things that can get you inspired with that azul and that blue color. But with that, again, a big thank you to everyone who tuned in today. both here on the Zoom call, on the Zoom webinar, as well as on YouTube. We are very grateful for your time. And I don't know, what can I say to all of you speakers? Thank you so much for your richness. And this is what happens when you get passionate people talking. We can spend 2, 4, 6 more hours if they leave us to this. But we have to call it a day for now. We'll leave you as we farewell, and we say good evening to you all with a little piece of a video that's left there that's a little bit more active and give you that energy just before some of you are starting your day still in Nicaragua and Esteli, Alex. And in your case, they're in the Connecticut region and New Hampshire, beginning halfway or so. So let me leave you with that. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Again, we hope that we've accomplished what we intended to do. As we said, there were 2 things. One, that you learned a little bit and shared that, and we were able to share some of that knowledge. And number 2, the most important as well, is that you realize how much this is an alive thing. This is not a theater. This is not a painting. This is not just a book. This is not just a story. This is alive, flesh, bones, smoke, leaves, and dreams. So with that, thank you very much. And I leave you with a piece of music from Diriamba. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And with the Sacuanjoche in the back of your minds, we leave you with the natural flower of Nicaragua. Have a nice, wonderful evening, all of you, and thank you very much. All the best. Till the next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Paul, Nicholas, and Alex.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Pleasure.
Everyone.
All right. Thank you, Ricardo. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Paul.
All right. Hopefully we can all meet one day in person.
Sooner than later. We'll make that happen.
All right.
You come and visit us for sure, at least. Take care.